Hello, everybody, and welcome to God and Life Stories from Pain to Passion to Purpose to Peace. I'm so excited to have my friend stephenMccutchan with us to share his life story and God's work in his life. Steve and I met at Westminster Shores, an active retirement center where I worked for 5 years, and we became fast friends and were also members of a centering prayer group on Mondays. Steve is an ordained minister and has been ordained for 51 years. Amazing, Steve. And then served 3 churches in 38 years.
Right.
And Steve retired in 2006 and wrote how many? 23 books?
About 25.
25 books. And on different, I think, 2 mysteries, but mainly clergy help. So Steve, welcome and thank you for being with us. How are you doing?
I'm doing fairly well. This is a good day. I got outside today. There was a safe way to play bocce with friends I haven't played with for several months, and that was sort of fun.
Good. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, you have to be careful with bocce and the ball and touching.
Right. Got to clean everything and sanitize your hands and all that stuff.
Yeah.
All of it important, but it's bothersome too.
Yeah, I know. But we talked early a little bit before we started recording that really COVID is getting worse in a lot of places, and we have to really be careful.
All over the world, and there is absolutely no one who really knows what to do about it.
Yeah.
Lots of people got ideas and they conflict, and then we try to sort out, and so it's very confusing for the average person. But there are some basic things we know.
Yes.
And those are masks and distances and just using your common sense.
Absolutely. Washing your hands, that's still important. Yeah. Steve, thank you so much. I know, I interviewed you for a life story at Westminster once, so I know a little bit about your story, and that's why I asked you to be on this God and Life Stories. Let's start with, this is from pain to passion. Let's start about your childhood pain that you were sharing with me earlier.
Okay, I actually was thinking about that this morning in my morning meditations. One of the things I realize is how, if I look back, I can see God's presence a lot in my life, usually in the low points where I needed it. I was raised on a farm in Illinois, and at about 9 years of age, my father got very sick with cancer. And so I didn't even see him for the last year or so of his life, but he died when I was about 11. And being on the farm, you aren't close to a lot of people to work, you're out on the farm. We moved a few years later into a small town, and that gave me more community, but I knew what loneliness was. I knew that I didn't have a father, and other people did. I was different from other people, and when I even came in from the farm to the little town, got into school, all these kids had their own way of life, and I had to make my way of life. Mm-hmm. And I think that actually taught me a lot as I look back on it. And I think I don't for the moment think God killed my father so that I'd become more sensitive to others, but since God died, no, that was later. Since my dad died, I learned what it's like to be left out and to have things different and to feel pain. And that I think has helped make me more sensitive to other people's pain, which led to my developing those skills of listening and caring in the ministry. Mm-hmm. So I think it all, fit together in a way that as I look back on it, was a blessing in disguise. It certainly wasn't a blessing that happened, but God worked at it. And there are lots of other things in my life. If I trace my life up till now, the what might not have been or what might not have happened, which would have altered my life totally, they did happen unexpectedly and yet full of blessing in a way that made me the person I am.
Yeah. Yeah. So often while we're in this situation and in the pain, there's no way we can know,
No,
like,
no.
but looking back, as you said, looking back on it, then we can see, and it's not God who's doing this so we can learn, but I think the lesson I'm getting out of my life and hearing your story, we can transform the pain, because kind of like we don't want other people to have to go through this pain. So we are transforming it into a passion and into a purpose, helping other people, because we know what this pain looks like. So how did that influence your childhood, your pain, your career choice?
Well, I think it influenced it a lot. Uh, we had a little tiny one-room church, probably 30 or 40 people in that church when I was a little child. And I remember being there, but I also remember, another unexpected event. When we moved into town, we chose a small, rather conservative Presbyterian church who had a Wednesday after school youth group.
Mm-hmm.
And since I didn't have anything to do, I went.
Mm-hmm.
And I will always remember, and a lot of the details are a little fuzzy now, but I always remember that one Wednesday afternoon, they showed a film strip. Most of us don't even know what film strips are anymore, but they were the little things, and in that film strip was David Livingstone, the missionary, and he was walking through the jungle, and there was a lion around the corner.
Huh.
And what popped in my mind is, boy, wouldn't that be a fun way to live life? Running through the jungle with the lions and the tigers and so on. And actually, that wasn't a great religious moment in terms of God calling me and a voice or something. That was something that occurred that stimulated my mind to think about it. And then as I worked with that, then I felt like I wasn't alone. Someone was with me, guiding me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as I got, this is a little preacher talk, I understand, but as I got to reading the Bible more, I realized how many times Israel looked back at where God had been in their past that gave them courage to face the future, whether it be in Egypt or whether it be in the wilderness or many of their battles or whatever. And I have worked at continually how to trust God for the future. I don't know what will happen, and it's transformative, as you talked about it, but it's not my control of transformation. It's just trust as I walk forward, a little like the Israelites walked across the wilderness. They didn't know where they're going.
Yeah.
They had an idea that it was up there, but remember when God called Abram, he said, go to the land I'll show you. But by the way, I'm not telling you where that is. You just start going,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I always wondered how Sarah ever trusted that, but
Steve, that one of the things that I've learned is, we look into the future. So I think what you were saying, it's good that we don't know. We just have to trust. But when we look into the future with our self today, it's like, then we don't have what we need to deal with it in the future, right?
I'm sorry, say.
Well, we will be a different person in the future. So if we knew the future, and we would be really afraid because we're looking with the eyes of today in
Right.
5 years ago from now, where I have different skills. I
Right.
have learned. God has guided me and given me what I need to cope with the situation. So that's what I mean. And that was really important to me to know or realize. That's why it's good to not know the future, because I'm not there yet. So it's
Oh
good.
yeah, if you knew what the future was, you'd say I couldn't do it.
Yes.
As you are aware, I lost my wife about a year ago.
Yes, I'm
And
sorry.
I would, if someone had said, this is what's going to happen to you, I'd say, no, thank you.
Yes.
I'm leaving,
Yeah.
But knowing that I have had this continual experience of God being with me in the future gives me some courage anyway to trust that even though I don't understand it and frankly don't like it,
Yeah.
I'm going to continue to live on, and that there will be good things that can come out of that, even though it never justifies what I lost. It means that it's not, the future is not all a waste. It has a possibility.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you want to talk more about how you were dealing with Sandy's loss and how, or shall we stay with
Sure.
you?
No,
career?
no, that's all right. That's all right. I'm getting better.
Uh-huh.
uh, I lost my wife November 30th last year, and we had had a wonderful 53 years of marriage. And we joked about the fact that we had 60 years because it took me 7 years to get wise enough to ask her to get married to me. And one of the things that helped me was I realized how many people don't have the privilege of that quality of marriage in their life.
Mhm.
And often through no fault of theirs, but they don't have that good fortune or blessing.
Yeah.
I had it, and I realized that the more I could give thanks for it, the more it gave me courage to continue on.
Mhm.
And so it was a major factor in my life. Is every once in a while during my morning meditations, I would just reflect on my life and how many times I have to be thankful, and all the Thanksgivings I have, and that gave me, and I'm still working on defining this for me, but that gave me a new understanding of grace.
Oh. Mhm.
Grace is an undeserved gift, but it's an undeserved gift that gives you value. In my case, God gave me, blessed me in these things. And so I feel like I am valued by someone. I'm not totally alone. I'm accompanied by someone.
Yes.
And so for me, grace gives you value in your life if you'll receive it.
Mhm.
Not everybody receives it. I don't always receive it. I had the 53 years. I also, 6 years before this happened, I moved into Westminster Community. We moved into the Westminster Community, excuse me, I don't quite have it all together. We moved into Westminster Community because we had decided that we knew that probably one of these days, one of us would have to die and leave the other one. And we wanted to be in a community in which we had support.
Yes.
Support in friends, support in healthcare, support in, I'm a lousy cook, so I have support in meals, all those things. And that was a great decision because it's a beautiful community and it's a peaceful community, and I can go out and look at the water and meditate and feel that peace. But I also, in those 6 years, developed a really good supportive friendship, which has been very helpful to me along the way.
Mhm.
And the third thing that I found is the value of humor. And I have learned, I now do a little stand-up comedy routines and write humorous things because I found that humor helps you step back from your immediate experience enough to give you a little perspective.
Mhm.
And so that helps me. And so, friends, Thanksgiving, and humor are 3 ways that I've survived the last year.
Mhm.
And there have been times, quite honestly, I didn't want to survive, but I did. And I
Mhm.
knew I had to because its effect on my 2 daughters of losing both parents would be overwhelmingly worse than even losing one.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't do that to them. And sometimes that was what kept me going.
Mhm.
But it all is pulling together enough so that I feel like I have something that I can still contribute to the world and help other people's lives. You and I have talked about, I wrote a series of 9 books. I'll show you one of them.
Yes.
Clergy Emotional Health is one of 9 volumes on what I title Healthy Clergy Make Healthy Congregations. My years in the ministry have taught me the pressure that is on clergy all the time. There is an incredibly lonely profession in a way, the more sensitive you are, because you know things you can't share and you can't process with people and
Yes.
all those things. And sometimes you have to take, maybe it's undeserved, but criticism that you take to heart and you can't deal with that quite, and all those things. So I wrote these 9 volumes so that pastors had resources to do it. The other thing that happened in my life when I was in, one of the reasons it took us 7 years to get married was that when I graduated from college, I suddenly was convinced that I needed to go abroad before I went into ministry, and so I went into Peace Corps.
Oh, okay.
And I was in Peru for a couple of years, and my now wife then waited, which I'll never quite understand why she did, but I'm ever grateful for that.
Well, I do why she waited. I know.
Thank you, but all I'm saying is I had no guarantee of that. In fact, we weren't engaged, we weren't pinned or any of that. We dated all through college, but that was it. But when I came back, having lived in Peru and worked in poor sections of the Arequipa community and so on, I was all gung ho to go into ministry and go into poor places and help the poor.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a man named Stokely Carmichael, which some people will remember, of Black Power fame, and for white people seemed sort of radical in everything he was doing. But he came to our seminary in the first year to talk to us. And in that time, that was back in the 60s, those seminaries were made up mostly of Caucasian men. There were some women and there were some international students, but there weren't an awful lot of African Americans. We've gotten better since then. But anyway, so he came to talk to our class. And it was a fairly progressive seminary, it was a Union Seminary in New York City. And so we thought we were pretty liberal and progressive and so on. And he was talking to us about the needs of the world and racism and so on. And another one of those things I'll always remember, he stopped in the middle of his speech and he looked at us and he said, I know you all think you're liberal, progressive, you want to be against racism, you want to be help the poor, uplift you, but I want to tell you something. I don't want you to come down to the ghetto and get rid of your guilt on my back.
Wow.
I want you to go out where the suburbs and places where white people have power and there attack racism. And that set me off on a 50-year journey that working against racism in a variety of ways. Not that I always knew a lot about what I was doing, but one of the things I learned is if you're going to do something significant, you got to be willing to mess up and have enough humility to learn from that.
Yes.
And so I've done it. And now that's one of my other projects in addition to healthy clergy is developing some anti-racism material. I've got a book that I put out called Racism and God's Invitation. And it's sort of a guide for a Caucasian or predominantly Caucasian church and how they could involve themselves in a creative and positive way to face racism. Because one of the things that happens for white people is they either live in denial. Racism is all that stuff that happened back there with slavery or civil rights or something, or they live in guilt. It's so overwhelming, I don't know where to start. And every time I try to start, they tell me I'm wrong. And so I wanted to develop a way in which churches, and I think it belongs in all society, but my venue is churches, how they could understand their faith in a way that got them beyond denial and guilt and begin to offer a progressive and creative way to join with this world in healing racism.
Wow.
And so that's why I developed a book, and I'm now writing a novel that tries to flesh out how it would look in real life if a church did all this.
Wow.
In this world. So those are things I'm working on, but it happened you know, from those events.
So let me kind of look back on what you were saying, that growing up, feeling left out, you know, your dad dying, feeling lonely, you developed compassion for people who are in pain. And then when, it's interesting when you talked about the film strip and saw, you know, the missionary, the minister. So those two things came together. I mean, that's how I understand it. And that's how, or one of the reasons why you went into ministry. And so the pain from your childhood, you know, became a passion. And then you also went into the Peace Corps and you saw how people lived in other countries, which I think in the United States, often we are not aware how other people live. So that gave you compassion for the poor. And then what I love in your story is that you actually knew we have people like this in the United States. We don't have to, you know, go and minister in other, I mean, if that's our calling, we do it, but we can also do it right here in our community.
Well, one of the experiences in the Peace Corps was I would read these Peruvian newspapers and this was right in the middle of the heavy civil rights movement, and see pictures of Bull Connor and his dogs attacking marchers. And I would sit there saying, that's my country. That's what other people are reading about my country. So that reinforced my desire to do something that would eliminate that sort of horrible image of who we are and open up who we could be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so there is also some, how should I put that? Some pride about your country, about the US, and that
Of
this
course.
is not what the country is all about. And we're facing this right now again, with the unrest and the racism. So,
Well, and again, we're facing denial or guilt rather than saying, oh, wow, there's something we could do.
yeah,
And we love our country enough to want it to be good. This
yeah,
may be controversial, but your that whole thing about what is it, the football player who kneeled,
yes.
Kaepernick.
I don't remember.
I don't remember his name, but anyway,
Yeah.
started a whole protest because he kneeled during the anthem.
Yeah.
And one could see, and they called him unpatriotic and all that sort of stuff. When I kneel before someone, that's to show respect.
Yes.
And I could see him saying, as Dr. King had said before, there are good things in this country, but let's live up to them rather than let our life demonstrate that they aren't real.
Yeah.
And so I think that's all part of it.
Yeah.
We
But I
can love our country and we'll love it into being the best. It's like meeting a friend who is doing something terrible. You don't say, he's my friend, so I won't recognize it's terrible. You say, I want to help you do better.
Right, right. And Steve, you said something that I think is so true as well, that sometimes we don't know how to start and where to start. And I remember too, it's when I came to this country, I was 30 years old, and I was afraid to say something because I didn't want to seem racist, but it felt like, oh my God, I'm afraid to say something wrong.
Right.
So with writing your book about how to do it, again, that's a wonderful help. It's passion, it's purpose, it's God's. I feel like God has had a purpose, or has a purpose for every one of us. And whether we live into it or not, there's the free will. And I feel like you have all the invitations, and you were talking about these little moments where it wasn't the big booming voice that told you this is what you're going to do, but those little moments where intuitively you knew this is where I'm going to go.
I think the Irish call those thin moments.
Oh yes, where the veil is thin.
Veil is thin, and God gets into your reality enough to help you understand something new.
Yeah. Steve, would you say, so this is not a leading question, it's something that I've experienced, so I'm not going to ask the question, but I'm going to share. In my life, the most painful moments I've had in my life, when I turned to God, that's when I got clear answers. But it was always in the most painful moments where I was open, vulnerable, hurting like crazy. And I want to tell one story that I was just, I had forgotten about it, when I got a divorce. So I'm not one of the blessed ones who had a marriage.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. It's not that it couldn't happen. It's just that I was blessed, and not because I deserved it, but it happened.
Yeah. And I got a lot of gifts. I have to say, even though it led to a divorce and that was mutual, the three biggest gift in life I got through my ex-husband. Okay. 2 of my daughters, and one is a place that I love.
Yeah.
So, but I remember when he left the church, left ministry, went out to LA, I was alone with my daughter, and I had lost everything. My vocation, my calling as a priest wife. I loved being a priest wife. I loved being immersed in the church and in all the spiritual things. And I taught classes. We lived in the rectory. We had all our community, our friends were from the church. So that was all gone. Everything was gone. We moved into a house that was for sale, that we weren't going to buy. So I was up in the bedroom making the bed. My ex-husband was in LA. My daughter was at school. And Steve, I cried out loud, God, why have you forsaken me? I have never felt this forsaken in my life. I mean, I was 54 years old, and and I knew it would lead to a divorce. And I heard clearly, and I want to say I heard it clearly in my soul. I didn't hear a loud booming voice,
Right.
but I heard very clearly, I am saving you. I mean, it was incredible. So I still had to go through the pain of the divorce and, building a new life, but I did it with peace. Even though it was painful, I had God's peace.
Well, I think Richard Rohr, who I'm sure is one of your familiar people,
Yes.
talked about, instead of thinking about how do I ascend to God to grow closer to God, it's how do I descend, because at our low moments, that's where God is there waiting for us.
Yes.
And actually, I can attest to that in a number of times, including my recent experience. We descend into the pain,
yes.
and we aren't. It's good to say, as you did, why are you abandoning me? I mean, Jesus said that from the cross, and that Jesus can pray that way. We ought to be able to pray that way, and because that's an honest feeling. But what we discover, as if you read Psalm 22 to the end, it's then you discover in the depth God waiting for you, and you can give thanksgiving.
Yes. And it's with this clear, when we go into, we all try to avoid pain. I say,
right.
I would say that's human. And so to avoid pain and gloss it over is, to me, not the right way to go. So to, like you're saying, descending into the pain, that's where God meets us. And that's where I am getting then peace and strength, I would say, to get through to what I have to go through. So, Steve, back to your career, and I want to talk a little bit about the way you're integrated, or you were part of an integration of a church, of a Black church and a white church. And I know you got actually a reward while I was working at Westminster. You flew up to Winston-Salem, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that? Because
sure,
I think that also came from some pain of knowing loneliness, knowing not being part of, being lonely and an outsider, and then seeing that your country, the U.S., you just wanted to help. It became a purpose.
Well, and the brief story is in Winston-Salem. I had friends that were white and Black pastors and all that sort of stuff. We dealt with a variety of things and trying to make the world better. But then we had a very horrible year. In 1 year, there were 3 horrendous racial incidents, one of which was that a young lady who was on drugs was put a mask, they arrested her, put a gag on her and threw her in jail, just waiting for doing something else, whatever they're going to do. And she vomited in the thing and choked to death, died. So that was one incident. A Black woman thrown in jail, she died. Okay. Then there were a bunch of what we now call white nationalists or Aryanists or whatever. But anyway, they were running around together, and they saw and found a Black man sleeping under a bridge, and they cut off his genitals and stuffed it in his mouth and killed him. So those were 2 Black victim things. But then there was also an incident same year where a bunch of Black teenagers were running around doing their thing as teenagers do, and they came upon a road grader, a construction road grader, and lo and behold, somebody left the keys in it. No. And they thought, wow, will this be fun? And so they turned the key, and the grader started up. And so they thought they would have fun driving around. And a police car driven by a white policeman tried to stop them, and they ran over the police car and killed the white policeman. Oh. So all these major incidents were making an extraordinarily tense city. And so I had lunch with 2 of my pastor friends who happened to be African American, and Presbyterian. And I said, you know, we can't solve the city's problems, but at least we're a church. We can do what churches should do. What should we do? And so we began, we discussed it, and then we said, all right, what we need to do first is gather people together from each of our churches and really investigate what racism and racial history and injustice and so on is. And so we formed the Presbyterian Interracial Dialogue and began to meet regularly and learn. And then we'd have, you know, joint worship services and events together. And we then began to act on things like the police review board was beginning to be explored. So we went and testified there. The school curriculum was clearly not, didn't have good balance in terms of racial differences and so on. So we advocated for that. Along the way, we kept inviting other people, different people to get it. And so we ended up, one of our projects was to build a Habitat for Humanity house. But that Habitat for Humanity build had Blacks, whites, Hispanics, Jews, Muslims, and Christians. And in fact, that was one of the awards that we did get. It was awarded at that time as the first multi-faith and racial build in the world.
Wow.
From Habitat for Humanity. And then the award you heard about was after I'd come here, they invited me back because they gave me an award for my interracial work in the city. But it all came about because of friends who I cared about. And I was aware of injustice because I felt mistreated sometimes, not nearly as badly as they, but when you feel it, you feel it.
Yes.
And so I grew up being very concerned about justice and fairness and inclusion. And that grew as an adult. And that the principal thing was racial for me because you could see it in our society. We had a Hispanic community. There were a lot of immigrants there and being mistreated because of that. We had the Black and the white churches as well as society. And it all just built on each other because it was natural to reach out to your friends and say, we got to do something and figure out what to do.
Yeah.
That's a long answer to a short question. But
No. I mean, that's wonderful. And it shows how from, back to the topic we're talking about, that the pain we're experiences, we can transform it with God's help if we go step by step by step. And I like, you were kind of saying, like, your mess. At one point you said something, you start, and even though it's not perfect, but you have to start somewhere. You
try to avoid having pride that you know what to do.
Yes.
You know what the problem is, and you're willing to work with the problem, but you're humble enough to be taught.
Yeah.
My two pastor friends and I got together for lunch, one of them, who was fairly radical as a person in his ministry, he said, all right, I don't mind getting together and studying, as long as you understand that it doesn't end there. We got to do something.
Yes.
Action is important. Well, I hadn't thought about that in that way, and he pushed me forward. I've learned a lot about racism, and that I'm a racist, a recovering racist, but there are lots of issues that I don't understand. And I think we have to have enough humility to say, we know what the problem is, or at least we know how we experience that problem.
Right.
But we need to learn a lot and have enough humility to even make mistakes and then learn from them.
Yes. Yeah. And there again, what you were saying is to know, going to our own pain and our own being humble enough to say, I'm a recovering racist. And being humble. And I think it's important too. I've talked to people, and especially at Westminster, some people that are like, I'm not a racist. There was no racism. But to go and say, tell me about this. I want to understand, and not say, you don't know anything, kind of, to meet people. Like, I think what God is loving us no matter how and where we are.
Right.
And to meet people where they are and understand, I think, is a step to change. If I just cut them out, and say, oh, you're just not a friend because of this and that and the other, that's not changing the world in my mind. That's
Well, the center of our faith is relationships.
yes.
It starts with God loving us, but also having us love our neighbor.
Yes.
And one of the things that for me at least is clear from about the beginning of Scripture is that God loves diversity.
Yes.
And so it isn't making, and one of the problems that we have with race is that we want to make Hispanics lose their accent, we want to make Black people lose their color, rather than saying each of them have something to contribute to the beauty of the whole.
Absolutely.
You have flowers there. If
Yeah.
they were all green, they'd be less pretty than they're yellow and in a vase that has some color in it.
Absolutely. We look at nature, how colorful and beautiful it is. Steve, we're coming to the end of our time, and thank you so much. This was wonderful. And is there anything else you would like to share before we say goodbye?
Well, I appreciate you doing this, and I appreciate you letting me do it with you. Obviously, I'm interested in people going on my website and finding my books and seeing what would be valuable to them. But I think that we share in a concern for the beauty of the world. Mm-hmm. And we each approach it from a little different angle. And you bring your German experience. I don't have that.
Yes.
So you enrich me by that. Mm-hmm. And the more we can open ourselves up to that which is different, if the goal is to grow close to God, there's nothing more different than God. Mm-hmm. And if we can't learn to live with the minor differences we have in this world, we're never prepared to meet God. Yeah. I think one of the blessings of the world was that despite the fact that there's zillion stars and planets and so on, we've never met aliens from another planet because we're not capable of dealing with that because we can't even deal with our differences here. But certainly we can't deal with meeting God. And so we're growing towards our capacity to open ourselves to the love of God who is totally different from us. Wow.
I never thought about it this way, Steve. That's a big learning process from you right now to think about. If I heard you correctly, as long as we are not loving other people that are different from us, we can't really love God. We can't face God because we're not capable. If we can't love our brothers and sisters, and the other is fun to think about. Well, we can't even love who's on Earth. Why would we go to other planets and encounter maybe other living beings there?
Yeah, that's one thing I'll never experience that I always wanted to, was to really know that there were other, whatever you call them, races or whatever, humans or something, or life forms on other planets. I think that'd be fascinating to know about that. But that one I probably will never know. But if the idea is that we're not even ready for that.
That's true. That is true. I haven't thought about it. So thank you for that gift. And I also want to mention, again, coming back to your books, you told me that how long are you married? And I think you're still married to Sandy. How long? You had an anniversary, and out of the pain
53 years, yeah.
53?
3.
Yeah. And out of the pain of losing her, you decided to honor her, honor your marriage, your wonderful 53 years, and tell us what you did.
Well, Sandy had been my editor for all my books, or most of them. And there's a thing on Amazon where you can offer your books for free for a certain period of time. Mm-hmm. And so I chose the day of our anniversary and said that I had the 9 volumes on clergy health, and I would have a Thanksgiving extravaganza in her honor. And so we offered all 9 books for free for anybody who would download them. And almost 400 people did.
Wonderful.
And so it was sort of a living memorial that made me feel good and honored what she had done for me in my life.
Yes, wonderful. Talking about transforming pain. Beautiful. Yeah. Steve, thank you. And we'll talk again. We'll see each other again when COVID is allowing me to come back or allowing us to go out and have lunch somewhere. Thank you. And thank you everybody who is listening and watching. God in Life Stories, from pain to passion to purpose to peace. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much. It was fun.
Thank you.